I have watched dangerous men lie under oath. I have watched mothers collapse when verdicts were read. I have watched people walk into my courtroom thinking justice was something they could buy, bend, or bully. But I was not prepared for the morning an 82-year-old veteran rolled up his sleeves and made my entire courtroom forget how to breathe. His name was Harold Bennett. When he first entered, nobody looked twice. He moved slowly, one hand gripping a wooden cane, the other holding a folder so worn the corners had started to curl. His suit was old but clean. His shoes were polished with the kind of discipline you only see in men who spent their lives respecting rules, uniforms, and country. Across from him sat a woman named Vanessa Cole. She was younger, polished, confident, and calm in a way that immediately caught my attention. Not nervous, not emotional, not even slightly uncomfortable. She sat there like this case was already over before it began. And believe me, that kind of confidence in my courtroom always makes me look closer. The case seemed simple at first. Harold claimed Vanessa had taken thousands of dollars from him after promising to help repair his damaged home. She claimed he was confused, forgetful, and angry because he had misunderstood their agreement. That was her strategy. Make the old man look weak. Make him look unstable. Make the courtroom doubt his memory before he even opened his mouth. I have seen that tactic many times. When someone cannot destroy the truth, they try to destroy the person carrying it. Harold sat quietly while Vanessa's attorney spoke. He never interrupted, never shook his head, never made a scene. He just kept both hands folded over that folder, his thumb rubbing the edge like he was holding on to something far heavier than paper. Then Vanessa looked at him and smiled. Not a kind smile, a small, controlled smile. The kind people use when they believe nobody can touch them. That was the first moment I felt something shift. I asked Harold to explain what happened. He stood slowly, and the courtroom became still. His voice was rough, but steady. He told me he had served in Vietnam. He told me his wife, Eleanor, had died 2 years earlier. He told me the roof of their old house had started leaking above the bedroom they had shared for 49 years. Then he said Vanessa came to his door offering help. She told me veterans deserved better. Your Honor, he said. And when he said those words, Vanessa looked down, only for 1 second. But I saw it. Judges are trained to listen to words, but after enough years on the bench, you learn that bodies confess before mouths do. I leaned forward because suddenly this was no longer just about a bad repair job. This was about why a calm, intelligent woman would target an 82-year-old veteran, and why Harold Bennett had walked into my courtroom carrying a folder he was almost afraid to open. Then I asked him one simple question. Mr. Bennett, what proof do you have? He looked at me, then at Vanessa, and for the first time that morning, his hands began to tremble. Harold opened the folder slowly, and I remember thinking how careful he was with every page. Not because the papers were fragile, but because the truth inside them had cost him something. He placed 3 documents on the table: a handwritten contract, a bank withdrawal slip, and a photograph of his home. The photograph showed a small white house with a sagging porch, cracked steps, and a blue American flag hanging beside the door. It was not a mansion. It was not valuable in the way banks measure value, but I could tell it meant everything to him. Harold looked at that photograph longer than he looked at anyone else in the room. That was Eleanor's house, he said. She planted those roses herself. Vanessa's attorney immediately objected, saying emotion had nothing to do with the contract. I understood the legal point. But I also understood something deeper. In court, money is rarely just money. Sometimes it is trust. Sometimes it is grief. Sometimes it is the last piece of dignity a person has left. I allowed Harold to continue. He explained that Vanessa had introduced herself as the director of a veteran assistance charity called Home Honor Outreach. She told him her organization repaired houses for elderly veterans at discounted rates. She brought brochures. She had a website. She even wore a badge. Everything looked official. That is how manipulation works, ladies and gentlemen. It does not arrive wearing a mask. It arrives smiling, prepared, organized, and saying exactly what a lonely person needs to hear. Harold said he gave her $8,700, his savings. Money he had been keeping for medical bills and winter repairs. Vanessa claimed the payment was a donation, not a construction deposit. According to her, Harold had willingly supported her charity, then became angry when he realized donations were non-refundable. Her voice was calm when she said it, almost too calm. I watched Harold as she spoke. His jaw tightened, but he stayed silent. That told me something important. Angry liars usually overreact when challenged. Hurt truth-tellers often go quiet because the pain is already too heavy. Then Vanessa's attorney stood and began pressing him about his age. Had he forgotten appointments? Did he take medication? Had he ever confused dates? Had his family ever questioned his memory? Each question was wrapped in politeness, but I knew what he was doing. He was not examining facts. He was trying to reduce Harold from a witness into a fragile old man nobody could trust. Harold answered every question with quiet discipline. Then the attorney asked, "Mr. Bennett, isn't it possible you simply misunderstood what Miss Cole told you?" The courtroom went still. Harold looked down at his hands, and that was when I noticed the sleeves of his shirt, buttoned tight, pulled low, almost deliberately covering his wrists. At first, I thought nothing of it. Many elderly men dress formally in court. But Harold kept touching his cuffs whenever Vanessa spoke, as if something beneath them was burning through the fabric. I asked him if there was any additional evidence. He hesitated. Then he whispered, "There is one more thing, Your Honor." Vanessa's smile disappeared. I have learned that fear does not always shout. Sometimes fear sits quietly in a courtroom, wearing an old suit, holding a folder, and asking permission to tell the truth. Harold Bennett looked at me as if he wanted to speak, but something inside him was still fighting against it. His eyes moved toward Vanessa, then toward the spectators behind her. A few people from her so-called charity had come with her that day. They sat together in the second row, dressed professionally, whispering like they were attending a business meeting instead of a trial. That bothered me because Harold was alone, no family beside him, no attorney, no supporter placing a hand on his shoulder. Just one elderly veteran standing in front of the court, trying to prove that he had not been fooled by a woman half his age. I asked him again, "Mr. Bennett, what is the additional evidence?" He swallowed hard. "May I show the court something?" Vanessa's attorney immediately stood. "Your Honor, we object unless this has been properly disclosed." I looked at him and said, "Sit down. I decide what this court sees." The room went silent. Harold did not move at first. Then slowly, with trembling fingers, he began unbuttoning his left cuff. That was when Vanessa leaned forward, just slightly, but I saw it. Her calm was cracking. The prosecutor had not been involved because this was still a civil matter, but at that moment, every person in the room sensed that we were standing at the edge of something much darker than a contract dispute. Harold rolled the sleeve only halfway. Then he stopped. His voice dropped. "She told me not to show anyone." Now listen carefully, because that sentence changed the entire temperature of the courtroom. She told me not to show anyone. Not I forgot. Not I misunderstood. Not I was confused. That was not the language of a mistaken old man. That was the language of someone who had been threatened. I asked, "Who told you that?" Harold's eyes moved toward Vanessa. Vanessa's face had gone pale, but she forced a laugh. "Your Honor, this is ridiculous. I have heard guilty people laugh before. It is never as natural as they think. Real laughter releases tension. Fake laughter tries to control it. Harold rolled his sleeve higher. The first thing I saw was bruising, old bruising, yellow and purple marks running along his forearm, shaped like fingers. The courtroom inhaled all at once, but that was not what froze me, because beneath those bruises were words written in faded black marker across his skin, a date, a time, and a name, Vanessa Cole. For a moment, I did not speak, neither did the attorneys, neither did Vanessa. I looked at Harold Bennett's arm, and I remember feeling that cold weight judges learn to hide from everyone else. The kind of feeling that tells you a case has just crossed a line you cannot uncross. The words on his skin were uneven, written by a shaking hand, Vanessa Cole, Tuesday, 9:14 p.m. I asked Harold why he had written that on his arm. He looked embarrassed. Not angry, not dramatic, embarrassed. That broke something in me. Because victims of manipulation often feel shame for surviving what someone else did to them. He said, because I was afraid I would forget. The courtroom went completely still. Then he explained that after Vanessa took his money, he started calling her office. At first, she answered kindly. Then she stopped answering. Then she came to his house one night. That was the date on his arm. He said she told him if he went to court, people would think he was senile. She told him nobody would believe an old man who lived alone. She told him she had documents, witnesses, and lawyers. Then Harold paused. His eyes filled, but his voice stayed steady. She grabbed my arm when I tried to close the door. I looked at Vanessa. She was no longer smiling. Her attorney was whispering fast into her ear, but Vanessa's eyes stayed locked on Harold's sleeve like she could erase the evidence by staring at it hard enough. I asked Harold if he had reported the incident. He shook his head. No, Your Honor. I was ashamed. That answer hurt more than any legal argument in the room. I ordered a recess, but before leaving the bench, I instructed the bailiff to preserve the courtroom recording and ask my clerk to verify home honor outreach immediately. When we returned, everything changed. The clerk handed me a printout. The charity registration number on Vanessa's brochure belonged to a completely different nonprofit in Ohio. The website had been created only 5 months earlier. The address listed for the charity was a rented mailbox. And then came the detail that made my stomach tighten. Harold was not the only elderly veteran who had paid Vanessa. There were 6 others, 6 men, all widowed, all over 75, all living alone. That is when I understood the pattern. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a system. Vanessa had not just taken money from Harold Bennett. She had studied loneliness, grief, age, patriotism, and pride, then turned all of it into a business model. I looked at her and asked one question. Miss Cole, how many veterans did you visit after their spouses died? For the first time all morning, she had no answer. Vanessa stared at me like she was calculating whether silence would protect her. It would not. I asked for the courtroom monitor to be turned on. My clerk had found archived pages from her website, payment screenshots, and photographs she had used to advertise her charity. In every image, Vanessa was standing beside elderly veterans, smiling with one hand on their shoulder, presenting herself as a savior. But then we reached the video. A neighbor's doorbell camera had recorded the night Vanessa came to Harold's home. The footage was grainy, but clear enough. There she was, standing on Harold's porch at 9:14 p.m., the exact time written on his arm. The courtroom became so quiet that I could hear the monitor hum. Vanessa knocked. Harold opened the door. She stepped forward too close, using the kind of body language predators use when they know their victim is afraid to make a scene. Then we heard her voice. If you go to court, Harold, I'll make sure they know you're losing your mind. A woman in the gallery gasped. Harold looked down at the floor. Vanessa's attorney stopped writing. Then the video showed Harold trying to close the door. Vanessa grabbed his arm. Hard. the same place where the bruises were. And in that instant, I saw Harold's hand disappear into his shirt pocket. He pulled out a marker and began writing on his own skin while she shouted at him. That was the moment the courtroom broke. People started whispering. One juror covered her mouth. The bailiff stepped closer to Vanessa's table. And Harold simply stood there with tears running down his face, not because he wanted sympathy, but because the room finally saw what he had been carrying alone. Vanessa whispered, "That video is taken out of context." I looked at her and said, "There is no innocent context for threatening an elderly man on his porch at night." Then the final piece appeared. A spreadsheet recovered from Vanessa's email account listed names, ages, addresses, military branches, and marital status. Next to Harold's name was one word: recent widow. That was when even I struggled to stay composed, because this woman had not found victims by accident. She had categorized grief. She had ranked vulnerability. She had turned dead wives into business opportunities. And Harold Bennett, the quiet old veteran everyone was ready to dismiss as confused, had saved the one piece of evidence she never expected: his own arm. I looked at Vanessa, and for the first time, her confidence was gone. Not weakened, gone. The courtroom had seen the truth, and now justice was no longer waiting outside the door. It was standing directly in front of her. I ordered Vanessa Cole not to leave the courtroom. Her attorney immediately stood, but his voice had lost the confidence it carried at the beginning of the case. He knew what everyone knew. This was no longer only about civil damages. This was fraud, intimidation, elder abuse, and possibly a pattern that had harmed people who were too ashamed, too lonely, or too afraid to come forward. I awarded Harold Bennett every dollar he had lost. Then I added damages. But money was not the moment that stayed with me. The moment that stayed with me came after the bailiff escorted Vanessa away for further investigation. Harold remained standing, still holding his rolled sleeve with one trembling hand. The entire courtroom looked at him differently now, not as a confused old man, not as a victim, as a witness who had refused to let fear erase the truth. I asked him if he wanted to say anything. He looked toward the empty chair where Vanessa had been sitting. Then he said, "My wife always told me to write things down if they mattered." That sentence broke the courtroom more than any verdict could, because in the end, Eleanor was still protecting him, not through money, not through lawyers, through one habit of love: write down what matters. And Harold did. He wrote the truth on his own skin when nobody else was there to believe him. I have presided over many cases, but that one changed the way I look at silence. Sometimes silence is not weakness. Sometimes it is an old soldier gathering the courage to show his wound. So remember this: predators do not always attack with fists. Sometimes they attack with paperwork, false kindness, fake charities, and perfect smiles. They search for people who live alone, people who grieve quietly, people who still believe a handshake means something. But justice has a way of finding the small details they overlook. A shaky signature, a hidden camera, a date written on an arm, and the courage of one 82-year-old veteran who walked into my courtroom with nothing but a folder, a cane, and the truth. That day, Vanessa Cole thought Harold Bennett was too old to fight back. She was wrong. He did not shout. He did not threaten. He simply rolled up his sleeve. And the truth spoke louder than everyone in that courtroom.